It's Tuesday evening. I haven't done a lot out in the shop this week. I've got a couple of pretty full days. The only thing I did do to the knives since the last video was I just did some contouring, just a little bit, where the guard's going to go and where it blends into the to the blade right there. So that's turning out pretty nice. And I just wanted to get most of the excess brass out of the way. So I came and did on the back side, obviously on the hidden tang. I can pretty much kind of get that finished, and then the handle will blend into these surfaces, and this is going to be rounded some more. But I don't want to go too far with this until I get the handle on there so I can kind of make everything blend. And there's nothing else to do to this one besides degreasing it, and we're going to be epoxying this down into that in that tine. And on the full tang version, I've got it clamped up in this little jig that I made, and all it does is clamp on the flat here ahead of the blade. We have not done anything to change its profile, so clamping on that, it holds our drilled holes perpendicular so we can get a straight drill through. So I've got that set up. I've swung my drill press table over so I can still get support for my jig and get out here to these end holes and get them drilled. And I made this little jack right here just to support the end of the knife out here, so as I drill down I don't get any movement, so these holes stay straight. So what we do is we clamp everything up. I got a good tight fit on my handle scale to the guard on this side, really tight, clamped it in place. And so then we're using the tang itself as a drill guide, obviously. So we're going to drill down with these 1/8 inch holes, and we'll go a 1/4 inch hole back here for the thong hole. And then we put some locator pins in here so this doesn't move, and I've got those cut. And they're going to be the actual finish pins for the knife when we get it assembled. Then we'll roll the whole thing over, put it back in the jig, and using this handle scale and this hole, we're going to go through all three pieces, and that way we know that our pins are going to be straight to the whole construction. So that's pretty much it. There's nothing fancy to this at all, but if you do it in this order, you can make sure that your handle scales and holes all line up and your pins have a nice straight channel to fit through. That's pretty important. So with your clamps moderately tight, we're ready to start. And the only thing I did here is I decided to add a red liner to this handle, and so I want a nice clean juncture right here where the liner meets this. So I went ahead and took some clear 5-ton epoxy and glued these to this ahead of time, just to get them formed as a unit, so I don't have to mess with 3 separate pieces here and then 6 when we go to drill everything else. So this is glued up, and it's nice and tight to that with the 5-ton epoxy, as is the other one. And then we'll have the PC7, and a very thin line of PC7 will still be visible when we're done with this, because when you glue these things up, you don't want to put your clamps on so tight that you squeeze your epoxy out. That epoxy is what holds your scales on. The pins keep it the pins are there to keep them from actually moving this way and give support that, but it's the epoxy that really holds it. Just kind of want to let the work float, and just find that first hole. Just going down through to just not forcing anything, you're just going slowly through. I'm going to go ahead and take 2 locator pins and put them in here just to help me ensure that I don't get any movement. I trust the clamps, but hey, a little bit of insurance doesn't hurt a thing. So there we have 2 locator pins in, and now we're just going to move back to these holes. We'll do a 1/4 inch hole, flip the whole thing over, and then we'll do the other side, and we'll come back and we've got that done. But this jig is pretty neat. It really does help me keep everything straight. And there's no real good way to hold the knife after you've ground your tapers, and you really don't have a true flat surface. So that flat right ahead of the guard is extremely important in getting this step right. Okay, this is what we have to this point, just to show you. So we have our pinholes lined up. We've got them driven flush on this side. They're protruding here. And then we're just going to put the other handle blank in here. Give it a clamp. Make sure that we're outside all of our edges like we are here. And then get them clamped up. And then we're going to pull the pins. Keep them handy. And then just start drilling from front to back. And replacing our locator pins as we go. Nothing to it. And after you've done now, well, the only thing that makes this a challenge is the irregular surface of the scale handles. If we were doing wood or micarta, then we wouldn't have that much of a challenge because we have nice flat surfaces to clamp on. Can be just a little bit of a challenge getting a good tight clamp that won't move on a regular surface like that. But, you know, just careful planning and taking your time, and you're going to have some good results. So we're going to get the sandwich made, get it flipped over into our jig, and we will be right back. I got it flipped over, and this bottom scale I didn't grind in so tight as I did this top one. That's why you see so much excess hanging out. But we had plenty all the way around. So after I drill this, and before I take the clamps off and the pins out, I'm going to take a very sharp pencil and I'm going to trace down, and I'm going to get just about every bit of the excess off these scales. I'm going to drill my 1/4 inch hole first, since I already have that bit in here. Then we're going to yank it, and one at a time we're going to take our locator pins out, drill, put the locator pins back, and I just remove pins, drill the holes, replace the pins, working my way down to the butt of the knife. Alright, got a bit change now, and I pulled these two pins. I've got them at the ready, so we're going to drill these two holes through, replace these pins, then we're just going to work our way down. Nothing really to see, but I just want to show you these first two, and then we'll come back when we have these drilled out and on the bench. Okay, these pins will go back in, and then we'll just go 2 and then 2, and then we're finished. I hope everybody is having a good Friday and getting ready for a nice weekend. I've got the knives in epoxy right now. This one took a lot of epoxy, I'll tell you, to fill that up, but I got it down in there. I got it just shy of the top to where I knew when I pushed the tang down in there it would displace a lot of epoxy, and it did. I coated the hidden tang, filled the holes, all the little notches with epoxy, and when I set it down in there, I just I set it in like that, held it over my epoxy cup, and this is rather thin epoxy, and I let that just drain off into the cup, and it's still very loose. So I'm going to leave this in this vertical position just like this till about, well, when I wake up tomorrow and come in here, this will no longer be able to be moved, so I don't have to be quite as careful. But I'm going to set that out of the way, and I just have it centered on there. You can see there's going to have to be some blending on either side. I kind of want just a little bit of a palm swell right there, so I'll blend up to that, and then right about there I'll blend down into the pommel, and we'll get this this one will finish pretty quickly. So we'll set that up there on a flat surface and just make sure I've got a good push. And I'll tell you that epoxy, once you set it, doesn't really let that move around if you don't mess with it. And then this one's in clamps, so I don't have to worry about that one too much. Now the only thing different that I did on this knife compared to the other ones is I used temporary pins just to locate everything. And so when I glued these up, pushed them in, and then I put these pins through, which have been polished, and they're coated with wax, so the epoxy won't stick. And then tomorrow, right when I first get up, I'm going to come out here, take some pliers, yank these things out, and the reason for that is these pins are the ones that are going to be set into the knife permanently, and then the thong hole, which I've cleaned the thong hole out, all the epoxy off of there. But what I want to do is finish these exactly to length for each particular hole, and then I want to polish and round the heads nice and smooth and get a good mirror polish on those heads, because I've got a lot of shaping and blending to do, and there's no point in polishing the heads, and you can't grind them off flush. It wouldn't look good, and plus you're going to lose your texture if you try. I want to try to preserve as much of the texture on the handle as I can. Now in here I might lose a little bit coming back to blend this in, but I still want a nice smooth head on the pin, not just ground off flat like I would with a wooden handled knife. So these are just keeping the scales in place until that epoxy takes a bite. And then on the surfaces of both tangs, I took my checkering file and I just cut, not deep, but just some very light serrations on the handle scale, on the surface of these liners, and then on the tang surface itself too. So the epoxy is going to take a really good bite. This checkering file will cut hardened steel pretty darn good, and this is in fact what I intend to use to put my serrations on the top of the spine when they're finished. This is the last thing I'm going to do to the knife, is just put some very light serrations just as a finger grip. So the only thing I want to be careful of, I want to take some lacquer thinner and get that little bit of epoxy right there off. And I don't see any, well, there's a little bit right there. I want to take just a little lacquer thinner soaked rag and get that stuff off, because that texture is going to stay. So that's about it. You know, the knives don't look like much. They never look like much until you get them right at the finishing stage. But you know, all these stages are necessary to get to our finished product. Hey guys, it's Sunday afternoon, 46 degrees today and sunny. I'm loving it. It's days like this that make me want get the tiller out and start working the garden, but you know, it's too early for that. We've got a lot of winter left. But I got up early, fast forwarding a couple of days now. We had some dry time with the epoxy. I needed to thin it pretty well on this knife to make sure I got it down in there. I didn't want any air pockets, so I thinned it pretty well so I could just stand it vertically and let it flow, and it did. So I didn't want any voids in this. So what you see now is just taking it, and it's been maybe an hour in the rotary vise, and I'm getting it shaped. Not polished yet, and not quite finished, but it's turning out pretty nicely, the hidden tang here. But yeah, when you do blend, you know, you just you're going to lose some of your texture. There's no avoiding that. But you know, this bone underneath has a really nice color, and over the years I know that it will take a really nice patina. So we rounded out our guard too. This is all still what I consider to be rough, but it's getting there pretty quickly. So I thought I would show you guys. I get caught up in doing this stuff, so I went to have a coffee break and realized I had forgotten to do one of the most important parts of this, which is video it. So I do kind of get lost in what I'm doing. So that one is ready for the very fine grits, and then we'll do the fine grits here on the blade too. And then on the full tang version, same thing. We've got it starting to shape up really nicely. Got our contours blended in. Started bringing our contours around the side, and I had just started to make my thong holes and pins. I've got, now these are just in here loose, but this is a good way to keep track of until it's time to epoxy. But I've got the thong hole cut to length and buffed down, and the same with this pin here. And I'm getting ready to try fit another pin, and I just use this pin vise that I made to hold them. So I've reamed out the holes over there with the chucking reamer to get any residual epoxy or anything like that out of there. And the epoxy, because it was so thinned, had about a 2.5 day dry time to where it was firm enough to where I could cut it with a file and have it crumb, you know. But I had to thin it again to get it to flow down into these voids here. And I used the leftover epoxy to go ahead and do these scales. So a little bit of extra dry time doesn't hurt a thing. So yeah, that's that pin there. So what we have, these all have to be final buffed, but I'm just fitting these pins to where they fit, you know, just flush and they don't come up above the surface to where they can be hit and scuffed. So that's basically what we're looking for a finish on those, and I have 4 more to do. And before I epoxy these in, now I'm going to go ahead and do the fine sanding and bring all this up to a nice hard luster. Go ahead and mirror buff this and do the final stuff on the blade. And the pins, the epoxy is holding the scales on, and the pins kind of keep it from doing the shear effect going this way, and it works. Before I epoxy them in now, I take either sandpaper, or I really like this checkering file, and I'll just take a go around the shank of these and I'll just give them a good deep score, and then coat them with epoxy, and then down in the holes they go. And then when I get them set right where I want them, I just take some lacquer thinner on a rag, wipe the excess off, and leave it and let them sit. I do the same with the thong hole, and they're not going to push out, and they will also aid in holding the handle scales on. Not that I think this epoxy is ever going to let go. But yeah, that's the tapered tang, and that's what the red liners are going to look like. So yeah, I promise I'll remember to turn the video camera on. Boy, I really do get caught up in these though, and I just the time gets away from me, and you know, I could look up and suddenly it's dark outside. But I really enjoy this. But I think they're turning out pretty nicely, and we'll come back when we have them buffed up and sharpened with the logos on them, and we're going to make sheaths before we bring the video camera back. So we're going to take it from this to a finished knife. I just sharpen them on oil stones in a conventional manner. And you know, everybody has their own way of sharpening a knife. I use traditional oil stones. I can do the very rough shaping on an India stone, and then move up through my Arkansas down to a leather strop when I'm finished. And as I said, everybody has a different way of sharpening a knife. And if your way works, then your way is the right way. My way works for me. So anyway, guys, I'm happy with what is happening here on the workbench. And I don't know if you know or not, but I've got a lot of projects going right now. I told you I kind of gets a fever pitch on these knives. When I start, I just start cranking them out, which is what I need to do if I want to have any kind of inventory. Should I want to attend a knife show or two when they start cranking up in the spring. But we're going to carry on, and we will come back when we have these much closer to finish. In fact, I may come back on and turn the video on when we have the sheaths made, the knives final polished with a trademark on them, so you can see the finished thing. Because there's just not a whole lot to watch between now and then. I may film some of the sheath making though. But yeah, we're very close. I'm liking the way these are turning out. They feel good in the hand. They have a good balance. So I think they're faithful to what Warren Boughton had in mind when he designed the blade. And this is closer to what he had in mind, I believe. But what the heck? You know, we went ahead and did a full tang version too. So yeah, I'm happy I did these. They really have a nice balance with the tapered tang. This one does have a good feel to it. Alright, gentlemen, we will see you soon.